Shalom, and welcome to Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac-Kight. In this podcast, you'll hear detailed and relatively unbiased information about Israeli politics and current events. It's been an exciting week in Middle Eastern news and the news related to Israeli politics and the forthcoming election. So I'm going to dive right in. Let's talk about the international news first. The biggest news in international affairs for the week, of course, is the bombing of Iran by the United States in response to an attack on U.S. forces in Erbil in Iraq. Also, Israel claims that there was an explosion on an Israeli-owned vessel linked to Iran, and Israel itself fired at Iranian targets in Syria as well. So that's part of the big news. Iran looms large in the news, as always. I'm going to be discussing Iran at great length shortly in the main meat and potatoes of the podcast episode. So I will come to that shortly, and we'll move on with the other news until I decide to dive into that in greater detail. In a turn that's not all that unexpected, the Abraham Accords, which were backed by $3 billion of federal money, U.S. Public money, may be bankrupt soon. The current administration does not seem to be eager to fund the $3 billion. The head of the program has quit, and its future is uncertain. We were all somewhat concerned that the incoming administration would not be as interested in this peace deal as the outgoing administration was. Obviously, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain will continue to be at peace with Israel as within the pact that they made. They will still be eligible for weapons deals with higher tech weaponry and such to the extent that they're able to afford it if the U.S. government doesn't put money forward of its own. But at the end of the day, this is going to lead to a downgrade in the alliance. The full initiative, the full energy of the alliance may not be there because the current administration doesn't want to give any victories to the prior administration. Well, that's an unfortunate thing. However, it is a really huge step that these two countries came out of their enmity with Israel and decided to form an alliance in any case. And in the future, this is going to have a massive and significant impact nonetheless. For one thing, Iran now knows that an attack on Bahrain, which they claim is their own territory, by the way, just a note, or the United Arab Emirates would necessarily involve retaliation from Israel, which regards itself now as an ally of those two countries. The United States State Department also released a statement this week saying they are interested in an Israeli-Saudi pact, if one can be forged, but concerned about Saudi Arabia not sharing our values. In order for Saudi Arabia to join such a pact, it's going to have to embrace, I'm going to call more Western values, as I've discussed before, in terms of what kinds of weapons sales might be available in the future, how they're going to behave as an ally, what their rules of engagement are going to be when they enter into combat, and how our weapons might be used in the Middle East by the Saudis. And also, obviously, Israel will prefer to have an alliance with a country that is moral and free, and people are able to express their views and practice their religions without persecution. Part of the Abraham Accords, as I described before in the supplement, is that these countries are not just making peace with Israel, they are also embracing religious freedom. And a good deal of why it's called the Abraham Accords was part of an intention to signal to everyone that this isn't just peace between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, but part of a larger desire in the Middle East to make peace between the three major religions that look to Abraham, or Avraham, as we say, Ibrahim in Arabic, this father character who is the father of those three traditions. If peace could be achieved between Judaism, Christianity, Islam, everyone kind of at once, then the Middle East will have a pathway to a lasting peace that won't just break down the next time some fanatic from one of those religions decides that they want to take over the whole place. So this is part of the effort to bring a lasting stable peace between these religions, between these countries. Obviously, if Saudi Arabia wants to be a part of that, they are welcome to join, but we're going to need to see some commitment from them to come up to Western values. It's not clear how that's going to be done, but in any case, a statement has been made. There's talk of it. Who knows what could happen in the future, and we will find out as the fullness of history unfolds. Regarding news internal to Israel, a major decision of the Israeli Supreme Court has come down, recognizing the conversion process of two Jewish religious movements in the United States. It sounds complicated, it is, so I'm going to explain it briefly. But the Judaism, the stream of Judaism, if you will, that operates in Israel is the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, people who wear black hats and have locks, black coats, this kind of thing. On the one hand, that's the Ashkenazic Haredim, the Sephardic Haredim, similar type of thing. The men wear black kippah or yarmulke on their head, white shirts, black pants, and so they have a tendency to have a little bit of a uniform. In any case, that form of orthodoxy is the Judaism that, in terms of what is considered religious in Israel, prevails. There's also the national religious movement, which is not as high practicing, not as stringent in that sense, more concerned with Judaism as a national identity. But the forms of Judaism that are popular in the United States, such as modern Orthodox, conservative, and Reform, that are very egalitarian, that is, women are included and given greater participation. They're more progressive, they're more forward-looking, some of these movements, Reform in particular, and conservatism to a lesser extent, but only slightly, embrace feminist ideals, and they support freedom and acceptance for homosexuals and such. These movements are not as stringent in terms of Jewish practice. There's an old joke that you should schlep on down to the Reform shul so you can have cocktails, those little shrimps with your oneg, with your Shabbat dinner or Shabbat treat, if you will, because they're not stringent about dietary laws or things like that. But, I mean, they are tied to Judaism in some way, and that we appreciate. So if you think of Judaism in the big tent sense, obviously those who are in those religious streams are included in the movement of Judaism, included in the big tent. However, where this breaks down, especially with the Orthodox, who, of course, believe everyone should be as stringent as they, is when we come to the issue of conversion. When the Orthodox bring in new people to the nation of Israel, it's more like a citizenship process as well as a demonstration of faith. As Herman Wouk described, Judaism is not quite a nation and not quite a religion, but a little bit of both in different areas. So when you start to bring new people in, the Orthodox are very particular about this, and they have a great difficulty bringing people in. They will often disqualify, Israeli authorities will often disqualify the converts of rabbis within Israel and without Orthodox rabbis around the world because they don't feel that those rabbis are stringent enough. And they'll also annul weddings and marriages performed by those rabbis, and this gets somewhat ridiculous. But that within the Orthodox religious community, they have authority there, but they have no authority over the Reform, Conservative, and Modern Orthodox movements, which operate independently as independent streams to the Orthodox movement. And as a result, what you get when you convert to Judaism through one of those movements, whose requirements for conversion to Judaism are not as stringent, is that the Orthodox don't want to recognize them. Now, they're happy to accept that a person who is born to a Jewish mother or born in a Jewish family is a Jew, so they will say, those Jews who go to Reform or Conservative, whose parents were Jewish, and they show up at an Orthodox yeshiva, religious school, let's say, they'll be taken, hey, you're Jewish, welcome. But if they came to Judaism by conversion through those movements, they will not be accepted as Jews, and they'll be treated like outsiders. For the purposes of the law of return to Israel, all Jews, including foreign converts, are supposed to be allowed to return to Israel and live in Israel as Jews. Unfortunately, a lot of people, both Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews, who live in Israel live in sort of from a religious point of view, a second-class status. I've described the problem with Russian Jews, for example, trying to integrate into Israel, because Russians regard a person's ethnicity by their father, not by their mother, and Orthodox authorities regard a person as Jewish by their mother, not by their father. This has created a problem where there are a lot of Russian Jews who are too Jewish to be Russian, and they are too Russian to be Jewish, if you will, according to Jewish law. And so they get kind of caught in between and end up having to undergo conversions. And then if you choose to be converted by the wrong rabbi, you can, and this creates a problem. But you can't marry a Jew in Israel when you're not Jewish by Orthodox standards. Right? You can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So there are a number of activities that you cannot do if your Judaism is not recognized. And so the High Court has, at the very least, required that Jews who are Jews by choice, who have given the Jewish people the greatest honor we could ever have, which is that people who have a choice to live anyway in the world would choose to become one of us and join themselves to the nation. Those people should be welcomed and should be celebrated and given fair and equal treatment, let's say. And the High Court has embraced that to a greater degree. Now, obviously, the Orthodox can still try to exclude these converts from different activities, but at least this is a step in the right direction. Marriage and conversion are two big, along with immigration that relates to the two, are big issues in Israel on the Jewish question. And in that regard, this is going to come up from time to time, and I wanted to give some background on it. Again, the High Court, of course, is the secular court. This is the Supreme Court of Israel, has decided in favor of the lower practicing forms of Judaism, which are predominant in the United States. If you find a synagogue in the U.S., you're much more likely to see one that is modern Orthodox, conservative, or Reform. But if you go to Israel, you're much more likely to see something that is one form or another of Haredi or Hasidic synagogue among the Ashkenazim, and some kind of Orthodox Sephardic synagogue among the Middle Eastern Jews who live in Israel. All right, well, there's been a lot of exciting news with Iran, so I'm going to take a little bit of time. I've been very focused on the elections, but I want to take a little bit of time to offer some background on the conflict with Iran and discuss events with Iran going forward and looking back just a little bit so we kind of understand where we are at this particular point. And I'll be talking about it a lot, it seems, over the course of the coming years, because Iran just keeps being the main antagonist in this story, right? As much as Israel is our protagonist, and we want to spend a lot of time talking about what's going on in Israel, there's going to be a lot of things that relate to Iran. So we saw a lot of tit for tat this week. Iranian forces attacked, or Iranian-backed militias, which is essentially the same thing as Iran, right? We know that. Attacked U.S. forces in Erbil, which is in the Kurdish region in Iraq. And as a result, the U.S. government responded with strikes in Syria. There's also an explosion on an Israeli ship in the Gulf of Oman near Iran, out there in the sea near the Iranians, where Israel chose to blame Iran for that, and Israel made some strikes in Syria as well. So there's been a lot of tit for tat and back and forth with Iran on that. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is, if you'll forgive the term, being a little bit schizophrenic or bipolar, might be a better term. I don't know, because we're getting pretty pathological here about the negotiations toward Iran nuclear deal. On the one hand, the Biden administration seems very eager to return to the Obama-era nuclear deal with Iran. This agreement that supposedly Iran would allow inspections of their nuclear facilities, refuse to develop a weapon for 10 years, and as a result, the U.S. would lift sanctions, and we would all live happily for the next 10 years. That, of course, everyone at the time, including Bibi Netanyahu, warned us. The fact is, this agreement has no teeth. There's nothing that really triggers the sanctions returning to Iran. The inspections are a joke because the Iranians, of course, don't allow international inspectors into every facility, as we've seen. And it had nothing to do, addressed not in any way, Iran's development of ballistic missiles. Iran has been developing missiles of greater and greater range that can reach into Europe now. And missiles that can reach into Europe while they're also developing nuclear weapons, sounds a lot like a country that has let's just say, an intention of holding America's closest allies, Israel and Europe, hostage to their, and not to mention the oil fields, a significant amount of the Earth's oil supply, the global oil supply, hostage to their nuclear arsenal one day. I'll get more into Iran's nuclear aspirations shortly. So the Biden administration says they really want to go in. They really seem to be frustrated that negotiations aren't headed that way, that they haven't been able to find some avenue to get back to the negotiating table. On the other hand, the Iranians are sitting there posturing as usual. They're throwing their weight around, saying, "Hey, we're not going to negotiate if you don't negotiate before such and such a deadline, and if you will only come back to the table if there are preconditions, like you lift certain sanctions or you pay us a certain amount of money." So the Iranians are engaged in the usual sort of chess match strategy that they always play. And I've said it before, and I'll have to explain a little bit more. It's always a game of chess with the Iranians. It's never something that's just straightforward. It's usually some degree of strategy or thought behind each move, so that a pawn will move here and there'll be a little thing here, but that there's a rook or a bishop coming from behind, or that the queen is going to move over here, and that if you're not careful, you'll end up in a checkmate, because they're always thinking a few moves ahead. They rarely make a move where they don't have some way to back out of it, right? So, of course, we have Iran going around the Middle East with all of these proxies, the various tendrils of the Hezbollah movement. And the Hezbollah movement is tied to the Iranian Revolution. They have chapters or army units, really, as paramilitary forces, let's just say, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and other countries. They have a broad international Hezbollah movement that exists even here in the U.S. that does fundraising mostly and organizing, gathering financial resources and equipment and whatever they can get a hold of to go to the Middle East to cause trouble. And Iran is always trying to gain some leverage over other governments, trying to take over governments. We saw with the Arab Spring, when the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt, that Iran was right there to lend a hand to the Egyptian government. And, hey, you're Islamists and we're Islamists. Let's be friends, and let's destroy the great enemies of our movement. Well, we saw how that turned out. Thankfully, the Egyptian military got back in charge there. But in any case, Iran is always shrewd like this. They're always thinking things through. And so if they make a misstep or a miscalculation, they have some deniability to pull back, right? Because if Hezbollah forces in Iraq, let's just say, fire at U.S. forces, it's not really Iran doing it, right? It's some other group. We're not responsible. It's these other guys, they take orders from Iran. Oh, well, we give them arms and supplies, but no, they act completely independently of us. We're led to believe this kind of thing. And so you create this situation where, of course, when some militia bombs U.S. forces in Erbil, we have to figure out how to respond to Iran carefully. Now, we saw that they played this game quite a bit during the Trump administration early on, and Donald Trump chose to assassinate their top terror leader, Soleimani, and once he was killed, that really sent a message to the Iranian regime, and they definitely toned down their activities for the remainder of the Trump administration. With Donald Trump out of office now, they're up to their old tricks. And it's not just that there's a new administration, because they always tend to start their chess match every time there's a new administration in town, but they sense that this administration is bipolar, schizophrenic, what? So on the one hand, we have an administration that says that they want to negotiate with Iran and peace and flowers, and we're going to get back to the Iran deal. And they seem to be dedicated to doing that kind of at any cost. On the other hand, they're bombing the snot out of Iranian-backed forces in Syria and destroying valuable targets there. That sounds more like, doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex that really wants to escalate the war in Syria, and not so much concerning yourselves with American national interests. Now, why why is Iran such a threat? Right? When we talk about the threats to Israel, right? What's going on here? We talk about there are different terror groups you're going to hear about. I've talked about Fatah, the Palestinian Sunni Palestinian movement that is dedicated, supported by the Arabs and dedicated to Israel's destruction, and Hamas, which, while it is a Sunni religious organization, is backed by Iran. But why is it that even though the Saudis and other Arabs have been at enmity with Israel, at odds with Israel, why is Iran the great threat now? And that requires going back into Iranian history just a little bit. Out of the Second World War came an Iran that had sided with the Allies, was ruled by the Shah of Iran, and this was a country that was oil-producing and poor and backward. And I don't mean backward in the sense that there's some kind of moral judgment against them, but look, we're in a world where we think of Western powers being very economically developed and people are very wealthy, and we have Iran where it's mostly pastoral. You have a lot of people engaged in agriculture and ranching and herding and that kind of thing in very primitive sense, and not as much urbanization and not as developed an economy. Well, the Shah saw this, and he decided he was going to bring the country forward. And so he began to expand education, invested in higher education. There was a greater urbanization. There was more industry brought into Iran. Iran began to modernize at a rapid rate. In the 1950s and 60s, especially in the 60s, Iran became a much more modern country, a country that, at least theoretically, is Islamic, Shiite Islamic. There were bikinis worn by women. Women were going to school. Women were in colleges and universities. Women were in the workforce. Women were dressing in modern Western ways. Young men shaved their beards off and were also being modern and Western. And during this time, there's the infamous letter written to the Shah of Iran by King Fahd of the Saudis. And he kind of summed up almost prophetically the situation in Iran in the 70s, as he said to the Shah, don't forget that you are a Muslim country. He said to him, you on the one hand, yes, you've modernized things and there are bikinis and education, all that kind of thing, but at the end of the day, you have to remember that Iran is a Muslim country, that a majority of its people practice Islam, and they're going to want Islamic values. Right, and that was something of a warning to the Shah. A warning, obviously, the Shah did not heed. And in 1979, things kind of boiled over, and a group of Islamists, or Islamofascists, better term, especially for this group, hijacked the country. There was a revolution of young people who were against the Shah and Islamists and those who supported their agenda. They overthrew the government. They took hostages at the U.S. Embassy. And then they started sweeping through the streets and shooting randomly people who had nothing to do with anything, but also theoretically cleansing the country of the people who supported the Shah. Funny thing, a lot of those people tended to be from Iran's multitude of religious minorities. Iran was a tolerant, peaceful country with great pluralism. There were a lot of Jews, Zoroastrians, Christians of various stripes. There is also a minority of Sunni, and some of them are ethnically Arab Muslims in Iran, most of them in the south near the Gulf. And this is another minority group in Iran. And these minority groups began to see significant persecution. And suddenly the country was no longer a safe place for these minorities. Large numbers of Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians were forced to flee Iran. Anyone connected to the Shah had to flee for their lives. And obviously the embassy crisis with the hostages was a major scandal for the United States. President Jimmy Carter famously could not resolve and botched a rescue effort. And Ronald Reagan, when he was elected president, the Iranians announced that they'd be sending the hostages back before he even took the oath of office. Something about the Iranian militants, they may be fanatical militants, but they're not completely insane. Again, chess moves, right? They understood that Ronald Reagan was not Jimmy Carter, and that if they didn't negotiate the release of the hostages, he would be coming for them. So this is another example of the chess game with the Iranians. Since then, obviously, they ended up in a war with Iraq. It was a very nasty, knockdown, drag-out war. But they emerged from that into the 90s, wanting to advance the greater Islamic agenda. And that agenda is very focused on Israel. They definitely want to see Israel destroyed, ergo their willingness to support all of these various and sundry paramilitary groups or proxies for Iran that are attacking Israel, and they're generally seen as being on the same side with any group that's against Israel, but not with Sunni militant groups like Islamic State, because those groups want to kill Shiites and disempower, disenfranchise the Shiite movement just as much as they want to destroy Israel. So there was a sort of a temporary suspension of hostility to a certain extent between Iran and various Sunni groups in Syria, where Iran backed the Assad government against Islamic State because Islamic State was a greater threat than Israel or other forces at the time. So this is the challenge. The Iranian people are a wonderful people. They have a pretty advanced culture. They're very intelligent. They're very scientific. They're very industrious. They have a long history. If you go and look the history of Persia, it doesn't take you long to figure out, oh, wow, these people were pretty advanced as a civilization. Their knowledge, translated into Arabic, of course, was important it was an important part of the cultural exchange that took place when the Crusades happened and Westerners finally got their hands on these Arabic translations of Persian works and Persian medical books, along with translations of various Greek texts and Roman texts that gave rise this information, this body of Arabic translated intelligent thought, intellectualism, let's just say. All of these works were brought back to Italy, Spain, and France as part of the at the end of the Crusades, and to England as well. And this is what fueled the pre-Renaissance, right? It helped to encourage thought and education, and helped give Western society a leg up. Now, we don't owe everything to the Persians, but it shows you, again, how important their role in the world as a source of knowledge and intelligence really is. Where we are today really describes the reality of what the Iranian people are capable of, and really how they differ from others who live in the region, especially from the Arab culture. An Arab friend of mine, in a discussion, we were talking about the differences between the two, and he chose to describe it this way. He said, when Arabs hate Israel, they form terror groups, they send in armies, they attack and attack. And he said, when Iranians decide that they hate Israel, they start developing a nuclear weapon. And to him, this defined the difference between the two groups. The Iranians are, being more scientific and industrious, going to look for a technological edge that will empower them. And of course, as we know, since 1945, no nation that has come into possession of nuclear weapons has ever gone to direct war or confrontation with any other nation that possesses nuclear weapons. All of the wars and conflicts have either been indirect conflicts, for example, Cold War struggles, or have been regional conflicts that have not directly related to the Cold War or have been about other issues, but never between nuclear powers. There is uncertainty in the world as to whether or not Israel possesses nuclear weapons, and I am not going to ring in on that question, but the Iranians certainly feel that if they come into possession of nuclear weapons and missiles that can carry them as far as Europe, that the United States will not be able to attack them, that it will stabilize their regime, and that it will protect them and their interests into the future, and certainly give them the ability to destroy Israel. The problem here being that Iran's government is led by these religious clerics, these fanatics who believe that there's a 12th Imam coming, and that by destroying Israel, they can bring on an apocalyptic age. So to what extent do they believe their own apocalyptic beliefs? To what extent are they looking for apotheosis and a change in the way the world works, that they might be willing to fire a missile at Israel, expecting that that's going to bring God down to kill off the Jews and make them the masters of the world? And to what extent are they going to be rational and sensible, like we are, we'd want to be, and think things through strategically? And they've always managed to balance the two, but they do have a fanatical rage against Israel and a belief that its destruction will bring on their magical age, if you will. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are very shrewd and have been very clever in the way that they have approached their conflict with Israel. And this is among the reasons that makes Iran the most dangerous enemy Israel has had to face. At this point, Iran is also the main enemy. The Arabs finance some groups that are hostile to Israel, but for the most part, the Arab governments in recent years have been pushing those groups like Fatah and the Palestinians to reach some kind of peace accord. It's over. Let it go. We'll deal with this another time. And Iran is the greater threat to them as well. And so most of the violence, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, various Hezbollah groups around the Middle East, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, these groups are financed by Iran. Iran is the main antagonist who is bringing instability and war to the Middle East. And the second, substantially smaller antagonist, of course, are groups like Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, these Sunni militant groups that are hostile to Sunni Arab regimes and Shiite regimes like Iran. All right, I have just enough time for a quick poll. We have another poll out. This one was taken on February 25th, so fairly recently, and it relates to the situation a little less than a month out from the election. As I've mentioned, with multi-party proportional systems, polls give you a pretty accurate bead on what people are thinking at the time they're taken. Again, we're talking about ballpark figures, which parties are polling 30-ish, which parties are polling 10-ish, that kind of thing. And so it gives us a good snapshot. Also, Israeli voters tend to be pretty eager to express their opinions and not very shy about it. So we do tend to get pretty decent polls. And while these are far from the final numbers, there's still a good month left of campaigning. We're going to see probably numbers close to this. There's always that possibility of a last-minute shift. This poll is taken by Haaretz. Haaretz is a left-wing news source, translates to the globe or the world, and they have a particular approach to polling. Their polls are not bad, I just want to say, but they do have a tendency to give the left-leaning parties one or two more points than other polls do, and the right-leaning parties one or two less seats than the other. So a little bit, but in this case, it's pretty close to what we've seen before, so I'm not too worried about it. So let's go ahead and look at the poll and see what we have here. All right, according to the Haaretz poll, Likud is at what they're calling 28.5, so 28 to 29 seats. Yesh Atid, that's Yair Lapid's populist center-left party, at 18. Strong second place for him. New Hope, that's Gidon Sa'ar's the main challenger to Bibi at the moment. His party is polling at 13.5, which means maybe 13 seats, maybe 14 seats. Again, kind of 13, 14-ish. Yamina, the party led by Naftali Bennett, that party is at 11.5. So again, 11 seats, 12 seats about. Joint List, which is the main body of Arab parties that usually don't participate in the political system, is at 9. Shas, the Sephardic Orthodox religious party, is at 8. Yisrael Beitenu, the main, used to be kind of the Russian right-wing party, but it's led by Avigdor Lieberman, kind of the secular right party, if you will, is at 7.5, so maybe 7 seats, maybe 8 for Yisrael Beitenu. United Torah Judaism, the other ultra-Orthodox Haredi party, is at 7. Labor is at 6. The Religious Zionism, it's the very far-right parties, are at 4.5, so maybe 4 seats, maybe 5. Meretz, the far-left protest party, is at 4.5, so maybe 4 seats, maybe 5. Kahol Lavan, blue and white, which is Benny Gantz's party, is at 3.5, so maybe 3.5, maybe 4, but that's right there at the threshold at 3.25. If you don't earn at least 3.25%, you don't get seats in the Knesset. And Ra'am, the Arab Nationalist Party that is not running with Joint List, is below the threshold in this poll. So what we're getting from this poll, I'm going to talk about Bibi's natural partners, Likud, which is Bibi Netanyahu's party, is still up at 28, 29, 30-ish seats, kind of in that ballpark there, depending on turnout and how the final election numbers come out. And his natural allies, Shas, United Torah Judaism, and the religious Zionism parties, they're running about 20 seats, maybe 21, maybe 22 among all of them, but about 20. So all told, Bibi is really looking at around 50 seats, maybe 49, maybe 52, but he's kind of in that ballpark. Those are his natural coalition partners, people who are looking to form a coalition with just him. That said, the opposing coalition would be led either by Yair Lapid or by Gideon Sa'ar, is not looking. Their numbers are a little bit higher than that, but they're still that's a complicated situation. I don't want to say it's not looking good for them, but it is and it isn't. On the one hand, they're running more like 54 seats to 56, maybe 55, somewhere in that neighborhood, a little bit higher than that. But we're also talking about some pretty disparate political interests here. And again, Gideon Sa'ar is putting himself out there as the main competitor to Bibi Netanyahu, as somebody who's on the right, but he's coming down in third place behind Yair Lapid. And Yair Lapid, the populist center-left candidate, who's really the main center-left prime minister candidate, he's in second place. So you're going to form a coalition that's going to have to require some kind of a rotation between the two. You're not going to have, Yair Lapid is not going to give up his presence there, his power, being the leading party in any kind of coalition. And when you look at some of the other parties that are going to be in there, you're going to have Meretz, a far-left party, with Yisrael Beitenu, which is a nationalist right-wing party, right? So that would be a fairly uncomfortable coalition. Now, for the more astute may have noticed that in talking about coalitions, I haven't spent any time on Yamina. And that's where I'm going right now. So, yes, Likud's natural allies, Bibi's natural allies for office, have about 50 seats. Then there's Naftali Bennett. Now, Naftali Bennett has criticized Bibi in the past, but he has also kind of kept the mum out there on whether he might join a government or not. He's polling at about 11.5 in this poll, so 11, 12 seats, very similar to the other polls we've seen that I've talked about. They've all been right in the same ballpark, so nothing radical about this poll. Again, one seat this way, one seat that way doesn't make a great deal of difference. But looking at this number, this set of numbers here, he's in a position to be kingmaker. He could seal the deal with Gideon Sa'ar and Yair Lapid to end Bibi Netanyahu's time as prime minister by joining with them and giving them a majority of the Knesset. Or he could go make amends with Bibi Netanyahu and form a government with him, right? His interests would more naturally align with Netanyahu and the right than with the center-left, for sure. So he'd be more comfortable and more natural, and a coalition more likely to survive and go a full term. Bibi has already offered him a rotation in office as prime minister, so could it be Prime Minister Naftali Bennett coming up? I don't know. In this case, he's kind of sitting there as kingmaker between the two. He can go any which way he likes. But he'll be more likely to negotiate with Bibi. But if Bibi is going to bring him into the coalition, he's going to owe him some serious geld, or as they say in Israel, major kesef. Kesef means silver in Hebrew, and it's kind of become a colloquialism for money, cash, right? Kind of like you might say, that's a lot of dough, or, I need some cheddar. Just kind of common language like that. So instead of referring to it in currency terms, like, how many shkalim are you going to, how many shekels? We're talking about, give me the kesef, or I'm going to make some kesef, So it's going to cost him a lot to get Naftali Bennett into the coalition. Bennett is generally more free market than a lot of other parties. He wants the virus lockdown restrictions lifted and has opposed those to a significant degree. He also wants provisions in the basic law that have to do with the Jewish character of Israel and protecting its Jewish identity. And so important to his constituents. And of course, many of his constituents are people who live in the Shomron and Yehuda, these communities that are beyond a green line drawn by the international community that they call the West Bank. But the reality is these are Israeli communities in territory controlled by Israel, where Israel provides the security. So this is ancient Jewish homeland. Well, Naftali Bennett is going to be in a pretty strong position, and his constituents are going to have a lot of the things they want. So this is the path now to a victory for Bibi. And as I've been mentioning, the rumors on the street are that Bibi is probably going to pull out a win. If he could put that coalition together, if he could put Likud together with the religious Orthodox parties and the far-right religious Zionism party, and then bring in Yamina, he comes to about 61, 62 seats. It's a majority. Those parties are going to be more stable in sitting with him. It'll be in their best interests, having won the best coalition deal they can make with Bibi, to stay in that coalition, and he might be able to go full term. More analysis on the election in the next episode, and with that I will say goodbye. להתראות.
אולי נפליגה בספינות מחוף אילת עד חוף שער, ועל המשחטות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהר